Okay, we're seeing some challenges. Creating a safe environment. Creating the right learning goals and success criteria has not been part of their work up to this point, so it will be a challenge based on the Common Core standards. Great. Rewards, students taking pride and ownership in their learning. What are some other rewards we can think of? Greatest reward will be both teacher and students having a clear understanding of the objectives and taking ownership of their own learning. Great. So we're seeing some themes here. Really students taking ownership of their learning and really understanding their goals and success criteria. So as you may recall, sessions 2, 3, and 4 are focused on different attributes of formative assessment, particularly those that are foundational and are introduced early in the same modules so that you can be aware of and support your teacher's learning. Today's session highlights leadership understandings and strategies that can support teachers' careful planning for formative assessment, particularly their articulation of a big idea or enduring understandings that will be explored and uncovered through learning. And they're specifying the learning goals and success criteria that will frame their instruction for each lesson. So as introduced in the first session, today's session will be framed by the questions that guide formative assessment. Where are we headed? Where are we now? And how do we close that gap? So the guiding question for today's session is, how can we support teachers in effectively developing and using learning goals and success criteria as they implement classroom formative assessment? By the end of this session, you'll deepen your understanding of the critical role of careful planning for formative assessment and the place of learning goals and success criteria, not only in that planning, but also in instruction with students. You should also be better prepared to address potential challenges related to supporting teachers in this work. You'll have given some consideration to how the formative assessment planning tools and processes may or may not fit with other planning tools and processes already in use in your school. And our success criteria and I can statements. I can explain what learning goals and success criteria are and the role they play in formative assessment. I can clarify how learning goals and success criteria relate to each other and to other lesson planning approaches currently used by teachers. I can recognize and address potential leadership challenges related to teachers' use of learning goals and success criteria. And I can identify leadership actions that can strengthen my school's current stage of implementation. So, any questions for you that may be emerging around success criteria? If you could explain in the chat box what you really are looking to learn about success criteria, I guess really filling in that gap of what you know and what you would like to know. So in the chat box, please share what you see as the most pressing question about success criteria for you. No pressing questions. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that quick assessment. So looking forward, where are we headed? Well, this idea is central that once students internalize the learning goals and success criteria, they can take the next steps in their own learning, receive feedback and apply it to their own learning, and give effective feedback to others. While there's been effort to have teachers post learning goals, the formative assessment process ensures that students understand the goals and that students are clear about what it will look like when they've reached their learning goals. This level of transparency is largely new to teachers, as was mentioned in the chat box earlier. The video previewed during the asynchronous session has teachers unpacking and clarifying learning goals for the high school ELA class. This type of planning is the first step, as it allows teachers to clarify and refine the learning goal and the precursor and foundational knowledge that's necessary for students to be able to meet these challenging learning goals. In the next slide, we'll examine that video. So in an asynchronous video, consider the following questions as we watch. And these are also on the agenda at the end for slide 12. What did these teachers do to explore the learning goals and success criteria for their unit? What did you notice in particular about how they planned for engaging students in understanding the learning goals and success criteria? And what examples did they give that helped us understand how these ideas would be reconsidered at various points through the lesson? What I'm going to do now is take you to our blog where we have the video posted. And if you could go ahead, just like last time, and play it through your computer. Unfortunately, our tool is not really the best at getting us there and letting us watch it all at the same time. So I'm going to post it in the chat box, and I will take us there and play it, but it may not work very well for you. Sorry, just to warn you. Give it a second. Okay, there we are. And I will mute my computer and you can play it through yours. Please go ahead and raise your hand when you have finished viewing the video. Okay, we'll go ahead and move forward. Thank you for sharing that with us. You can go ahead and lower your hand. So we're going to go ahead and review those questions just as a full group. And if you could use your microphone or your telephone to respond to the questions. If you do not have access to either, you can go ahead and type in the chat box and I'll share it out. But the first question is, what did these teachers do to explore the learning goals and success criteria for their unit? So please take a moment to either verbally share out if you have that capability, or if not, please go ahead and type your response in the chat box. And I've retyped the question for you. I see one person writing. So again, what did these teachers do to explore the learning goals and success criteria for their unit? And I suppose you could rephrase that to say, how did they prepare? And I see people typing. Okay, looks like a couple people hit enter at the same time. They first developed the big idea for the unit and created high-level expectations that relate to that big idea. Great. They broke down into pieces with one big idea. Great. So it seems like a theme. They started with a big idea and sort of scaffolded that themselves into those smaller pieces. For the second question, what do you notice in particular about how they plan for engaging students in understanding the learning goals and success criteria? So how did they plan for engaging students? Denise, you can go ahead and share. If you want to type in the chat box, or if you called in, you can go ahead and talk right now if you would like. Okay, teachers determine how to scaffold student learning. I see a few other people typing. Great. They identified the various areas of academic strengths and weaknesses of the students so they could plan student learning. Scaffolding. Great. So it looks like we're agreeing that they sort of anticipated what students would grasp quickly and what they would struggle with, and they planned on how to support that weakness that they anticipate. And what examples did they give that helped us understand how these ideas would be reconsidered at various points through the lesson? Because the lesson was very interactive, and students did really participate in creating those success criteria. So what examples did they give that helped us understand how those ideas would be reconsidered? So if you want to respond to that question, or if you want to give any general feedback or takeaways from the video, right now is the time to do that. Any questions or takeaways or anything that stood out to you? I see typing. Okay, and while you're typing, I'll just clarify. So really what we want you to take away from this video overall is that we want you to have a clear view of how effective teacher planning can really facilitate the process and help teachers deepen and more clearly frame those learning goals and engage students in the content. We realize that this is a high school video and you're elementary, so the process may be in the classroom may be slightly different, but this process that the teachers go through, especially considering how many co-teachers we have at this point, is a really strong process, which is why we wanted you to view this. And so this conversation that's taking place in the video, both with the teacher team and with the students, is really rooted in that formative assessment language. We want leaders to be thinking about that as they work with and listen in on teacher teams or coaching conversations. So these are the conversations that we're hoping teachers will have in their planning. Okay, so our next step, where are we headed? So we have all of these materials that have been transferred out to you. The formative assessment unit planning template, examples of formative assessment unit plans for the elementary level specifically. And our frame expectations are that teachers and students will co-construct learning goals and success criteria and use exemplars and model products. So the key idea here, the unit planning template, is a graphic organizer to help teachers ask themselves the kind of questions they saw in this teacher planning video. It walks teachers through each step of the formative assessment planning process. We ask that teachers use this unit planning template during this period, and this is the focus of Module 2, while they're getting used to each of these ideas. Once they understand these planning elements, they don't have to use the organizer, but we know that graphic organizers help, which is why they exist. And it also helps to have peers, so it could be colleagues of the same grade level or people who teach the same content, to help them to do this kind of lesson planning. So to talk through this process together. I know that that's how I work best when I'm dealing with something difficult, being able to talk through that process with someone. So 2 questions that I'd like to ask you are, how can you help teachers think about why this template can help them as they're learning? And how can you provide some time to have teachers create their first unit plan? So how can you as a leader help teachers understand why this template is important or useful? Please answer that in the chat box now. So I retyped that for you. How can you help teachers understand the importance of the unit planning template and utilizing it in this process? Okay, I see a few people typing. Again, this is a participatory webinar, so we encourage you to please share and participate during this time. So how can you help your teachers understand the importance of this template? Because it may be something that you receive a bit of pushback on. Okay, one way to show the importance of the unit planning template is to show this video as an example. Great. Okay, great, Denise. I need to understand it myself. That way I can assist them in using it correctly. Any template helps teachers to be deliberate in planning. Formative assessment requires deliberate planning. Great, thank you. Okay, one question that I don't need you to answer right now, but how might you provide some time to have teachers create their first unit plan as outlined in the FAME course? And we realize that much of the parts of the modules are to be completed on their own time, but thinking about Module 2 and when teachers would go through this unit planning template, a good question to ask would be, how would you share this with teachers and how would you encourage them to find that time to work on this process? So we're going to go through this unit template right now. If you want to go ahead and open it up, it is called, let's see, the Elementary Examples of Formative Assessment. And we will go through each of these together. So if you go to the first one, this is elementary reading. This is the same template that is shared in the FAME module. And we want leaders to be able to explore this, understand how it's used as a graphic organizer to help frame teacher thinking around key formative assessment planning elements, and also notice how learning goals and success criteria are constructed. This can be new for people, and we have found that schools have lots of words for these things that can make the concepts confusing. So what we're going to do right now is go through each of these 3 different templates. And we're going to talk about how the planning template aligns to the same kinds of topics and content in the video, and what we can do to help teachers think about key lesson planning ideas. And as we go through this, it would be really helpful, I'm sure, for you to think about how these connect to work that you're already doing or any sort of templates that your district or school already uses. So let's start with the first one, the elementary reading. If you go ahead and open that up, it starts with the standards, which are below. So this is grade 2 reading, analysis and interpretation of informational text and citing evidence, making inferences about causes and effects when signal words are present. It outlines what standards it will apply to and will be utilized and covered in this. And then as I discussed in the video, it has the big idea. So this is the overarching idea for the unit, understanding of a text's features, structures, and characteristics, how they facilitate the reader's ability to make meaning of a text. So on the left we have below that learning goals, and on the right success criteria. So remember that the success criteria must directly align to the learning goals, and the learning goals must directly relate to the big idea. So students will understand the differences between cause and effect, identify causes in a text, identify effects in a text, and make inferences orally and in writing and drawing about cause and effect from informational text. And the success criteria directly relates back to those. Students can explain how they connected information in nonfiction text, et cetera, et cetera. You have this in front of you, so I'm not going to read every part of it. But one step that would go a step further, this is obviously a planning tool for the teacher, but the next step would be to share the success criteria with students and then have them construct those success criteria in their own language. And then we get to the misconception. So just like they did in the video, they address what are some misconceptions that students are likely to have about this topic? What are some things that they need to think about? So you see confusing facts and opinions, students not using signal words, and students applying personal knowledge rather than text-based knowledge. And so your teachers can take that a step further with misconceptions and think about how they can address those misconceptions. But again, this is just a basic planning template. Oh, great observation, Kyla. This is helpful for Washington County. This looks very much like the Inside Out Unpacking Standards from Wiggins and McTeague that Washington County uses. Great. And so we encourage you to make any connections like that to what your schools and county already use. next, please take a look at the upper elementary science. It's the same concept. They have the big ideas, the standards, the learning goals and success criteria. And if you look, the misconceptions in this planner are less conceptual overall and something that's more fact-based. So again, these are things that teachers think that their students will have difficulty with, and the next step for these misconceptions is what to do about it. And then moving on to upper elementary math. So I think this is 5th grade. The big idea is coordinate systems can be used to precisely identify locations. Two-dimensional shapes can be identified, classified, and analyzed by their properties. So we see the learning goals and the success criteria. And the success criteria is already in somewhat student-friendly language. And the misconceptions students have, and below that, the strategies to share are very useful. So they have the misconceptions, and then they actually take it a step further and look at strategies to help share those learning goals and success criteria with students, like we saw in the video. So they'll be shared after the vocabulary lesson. So this pinpoints exactly where in the lesson the learning goals and success criteria will be shared. Students will do self-assessment after walking the grid and plotting points, so you see some of those formative assessment strategies integrated. And self-assessment against success criteria occurs at the end of the 3-day lesson. So we can see each of these elements that they are looking at as they go through the lesson. So, well, now let's talk about where we've headed, or where we are headed. So students, as we saw, students were developing and co-constructing success criteria for their unit. And we realized that at different grade levels, they will have different capabilities. Again, this was a high school English class, so students were able to pull out those elements. But as you can see on his chalkboard right there, he has the big ideas outlined, and he has those learning goals. So the learning goals are there on the board as students are working to create their success criteria. So halfway through the unit, the teacher directly involves the students in developing the success criteria for their graphic novel design through the use of exemplars and discussions of key elements. And the teacher planned for how to engage students during each aspect of the lesson. So in the chat box, we're going to discuss a few of these discussion questions that are at the end of the agenda. So how might your vision of having students involved in the development of the success criteria be sharpened from the practices in this video? So I'm going to sort of modify that question. So what is your vision for your teachers to help have students work together to create success criteria? And again, I've typed that into the chat box. So take a moment and please respond in the chat. What is your vision for your teachers to create success criteria with their students? Because again, we expect this to be an interactive process between teachers and students. Okay, I see typing. Again, we encourage you to share. You don't want to have to call people out, but please type your response in the chat box. Great, thank you, Molly. I see teachers as facilitators that guide students in identifying success criteria. Great. Okay, and I see a few more people typing. Okay. And our next question. What is gained by engaging students in the process? All right, Denise wrote us a great paragraph. I like as pictured in the photo that the teacher has identified the big ideas and then the performance goals for the lesson. That way the students can refer and the teacher can refer back to the essence of the lesson. This is something that was identified through our walkthrough. Great. So the next question, what is gained by engaging students in the process? Eric, by developing success criteria with students, the classroom will become engaging with a sense of student ownership of their own learning. Great, and I see a few more people typing. Buy-in, yep. Students are invested in the lesson from the beginning. Students begin to take ownership of their learning. Wonderful. So we're seeing a theme again. Students will have ownership in their own learning, great, and find learning more relevant. And our last question about this video. So what might be done to have exemplars used as regular practice? So what are some ways that you can integrate this into your school's practice? And I, again, typed it into the chat box, slightly rephrased. How can you integrate templates and exemplars into your school's routine? And you guys are at a distinct advantage at elementary because you do have that grade level team set up. So that is nice. So please go ahead and think about and respond to this question. How can you integrate templates and exemplars into your school's routine? Or again, you may already be doing this, so how can you strengthen those practices? Let me see typing. Giving appropriate wait time. Great. So Denise, introduce or reinforce them at every opportunity and make them common practice for all in planning. Keeping the end in mind, what have students learned? Wonderful. Again, like that roadmap that we've talked about in the past. Okay, and we're going to move forward. So you should recognize this chart and table from the pre-session work. So let's take stock of what we currently observe in classrooms. You are asked in your pre-session work to complete a chart that looks like this, indicating the extent to which teachers in your school demonstrate particular practices related to using big ideas, learning goals, and success criteria. Some teachers may show evidence of using these practices, or perhaps they use similar practices. So we're going to break into two breakout rooms for partner discussion, or for group discussion, sorry. You'll need Chart 1 from your pre-session work and Table 1, which denotes the enabling factors associated with successful formative assessment implementation. And again, those are in the files that I pushed out to you, so you could have those with you just in case. So I believe that is thinking about leadership for formative assessment. So these are our group discussion questions. What does current classroom practice look like in comparison to these descriptors? Are there any emerging areas of strength? And what factors have contributed to teachers' strengths or progress in these areas? I will be in one room and I'll repost these questions, and Arlisa will be in the other and she will also repost them. We're going to have a blank whiteboard in each room so you can type your responses, since not everybody seems to have the ability to call in. So I'm going to throw you into breakout rooms. Again, those questions are on the agenda. So I saw some great conversations being had in the breakout room about where your teachers are, what they're struggling with, and how they're moving forward. It's great that having teachers, it seems that having teachers focus really on unpacking those standards and learning them seems to be something that will help move your teachers forward, which is fantastic. So moving on, so how do we close this gap? So in your school, I want you to think about how will learning goals and success criteria be seen as compared to other materials currently in use. This is something I asked you to think about earlier. This is going to be part of your pre-session 3 work to think about and identify. So where might there be alignment and questions? So thinking about materials such as curriculum guides, learning objectives, pacing guides, curriculum maps, other organizers, as you mentioned in Washington County. So it's important to think about how this will align to other materials and other initiatives that they are currently doing in their classroom. And it's important that you as leaders can anticipate any questions or concerns or any misalignment that may exist. And this will be part of thinking about pre-session number 3. And I encourage you also to discuss with your MSDE liaison any of these issues that you're currently facing, because we can go ahead and look through the materials and help you integrate the formative assessment planning process into those materials that you already are using. Because again, we don't want teachers starting from scratch, because that is terrifying. So in our summer leadership, we had those cards that you got to do at the end called the challenge cards, where you look through a couple situations and you addressed how you would respond to those individual situations. And so this is kind of the same process. So what if, number 1, you ask a group of students to explain the learning goal they're working toward, and the students do not have a response? Number 2, the teacher's posted learning goal is an activity. We're making posters of Canada. Number 3, you observe a student team with a rubric that describes the success criteria, but the worksheet they're completing is focused on something that appears to be a very different learning goal. What would you say or do next? So in the chat box, please choose one of these questions to respond to, and please write a 1, 2, or 3 next to it. So in the chat box, please discuss how you would respond to one of these questions. Right, I'll give you a bit of time because I realize these are lengthy responses. So please go ahead and respond in the chat box to one of these situations. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share some of the responses. And let's see, Brent and Molly, we're still waiting, and Derek, we're waiting on you guys for a response. Okay, if the students are unaware of the learning goal, I would then ask them to walk me through the activity to see if they had an understanding of what they were to do. I would try to understand where the disconnect was. Great. I see a couple people typing, so we'll keep waiting on you. Okay, we've got more responses. With the poster, I would ask for the curriculum connection and ask it be shared with the students. Great. I would ask the students if their teacher had spoken with them about learning goals to see if there's any background knowledge. I would then speak to the teacher to see if he or she needed help with how to clarify the learning goals to the student and how to create learning goals with students. Great. The teacher may need to be shown how to do this with his or her students. Wonderful. If the students do not know the current learning goals, I would direct them towards the big idea that should be posted in the classroom. Then asking students if they can explain the activity that they're currently engaged in so that they then may be able to make the connections to what the learning goals are. I have a conversation with the students to see if they have an understanding of the intended learning. I would then have them walk me through the previous day's lesson to determine the disconnect from the previous day to the current day's lesson. Great. You know, and with number one, my first instinct is always to ask a second group of students because you never know. It's always a hit or miss. That's great. And so these are some of the issues that we want you to be thinking about and be able to address as we move forward. So looking at leadership considerations for Module 2, and we discussed this for Module 1. So the learning focus is learning progressions and the importance of collaborative practice. And so in this leadership consideration handout, which you have, you could have downloaded from delivered to you at the beginning of the webinar, it has a few of the potential issues that teachers will face and some leadership responses that you can do to respond to these issues. And that is, you know, administrators, building leadership teams, teacher leaders, the facilitators, some things that you can discuss with your facilitators to deal with any of those potential issues that may arise. So in closing, and yes, we're pretty much there, once assessment is designed to be educative, it's no longer separate from instruction. It's a major, essential, and integrated part of teaching and learning. So I want you to think about this quote. So to what extent is assessment currently seen as major, essential, and integrated into part of teaching and learning at your school? And I'd like you to just sort of give me a thumbs up if it's highly integrated, a thumbs down if it is not highly integrated, and you can give me the Mr. Confusion face. That's the blue guy, if it's sort of in the middle. So a thumbs up for Assessment is currently seen as major, essential, and integrated. Thumbs down if it is not, and Mr. Blue if it is sort of in between. And those are the tools that have the smiley face on them. So approval, disapproval, or confusion in between. Okay, so if you go to where your name is, the smiley faces will be on the left. You can click on one and it'll show up underneath your name. So please go ahead and do that right now. If you're having technical difficulty, go ahead and tell us in the chat box. No one? Okay, I guess I will move on. No one's responding. So looking ahead for the pre-session 3 activities, you'll read a series of vignettes illustrating how learning progressions are used in formative assessment. You'll review sample learning progressions and consider how learning progressions are similar or different from other curriculum documents such as curriculum frameworks, scope and sequence charts, and pacing guides. Remember to set aside approximately 1 hour to complete these tasks, which may be done in smaller bite-sized segments as your schedule allows. Let's turn now to thinking about next steps for your own school's implementation of formative assessment. You may choose to focus on implementing some of the strategies discussed today related to developing big ideas, learning goals, and success criteria for formative assessment purposes, or you may choose to focus on another area of implementation. The pre-session guide for session 3 will offer some suggestions to get you started thinking about this. And this is the same action planning tool that you have been using, and we encourage you to keep record out because it is something that we'll be collecting at the end of the fall follow-up leadership sessions and will be part of your school's portfolio. So you'll be asked in the pre-session work for session 3 to post and describe a piece of evidence showing progress on your goal, or even better, the impact of your actions. And the other sections are for you to complete as soon as possible following the session. So sections 3, 4, and 5. What else do you need to know in order to do the work? Who else should be brought into leading and supporting the work? And how will you work with the community of practice facilitators to align leadership and learning work? As you take a few minutes to plan forward, consider these 5 leadership arenas. Where will you focus your leadership efforts next? Guiding change, leading professional learning, monitoring and providing feedback on progress, messaging connections to other initiatives, or sustaining efforts with enabling factors. So for next steps, make sure that you complete your action plan and related tasks. Oh, there's a siren. You know that we're in downtown Baltimore. Complete today's session evaluation, and I will post that link in just a moment. And complete the session 3 asynchronous tasks. Those will be posted by Monday. Our next session is November 18th from 9 to 10:30 a.m. Again, if you are unable to make that date, please send someone else in your place so that we can continue this great conversation. And just a few reminders. Your facilitator must send the COP dates to your MSDE liaison, which most places have done. All webinars are recorded and can be viewed on the blog or on YouTube. And session 3 materials, as I said, will be posted by October 3rd. October 13th. Wow. Thank you for that, Arlisa. If you have any questions or concerns, please go ahead and ask them now in the chat box. We will stay in the room for a few more minutes. Or please contact your MSDE liaison. Thank you for joining us.